and I have with me
Caitlin Kelly, the Solar Carve-Out Program Coordinator.
And this is the compliance filing webinar for the 2015 Mass RPS and APS compliance filings. Mike Judge probably will not be joining us. He's extremely busy with other matters, including legislation. This webinar is going to be recorded and should be available at our website by Monday, along with the slide set. And on the last page of the slide set are links to our contact information and to the compliance document package at our website. First, I'm going to go through the slides, then through the workbook, and as I go, if you'll enter questions into whatever that box says on your screens for entry questions, and we'll pick them up at the end after the workbook. So let's get going. All right, how do I move to the next slide? Oh. Okay, quick review of the filing process. As you know, you've already got your banked totals if you have any bank from the 2013 or 14 compliance years. You all should have gotten your retail loan obligations by May 6th. Only one company that got it a bit later. The end of the trading period is this June 15th at midnight. The filings are due by July 1st, but before that, if you have any alternative compliance payments to make, ACPs, they've got to be submitted by June 24th for the instructions that you already have or that you get online. The filings come both electronically and hard copy. They must come both ways. We require the electronic filings by Friday the 1st, but it's really quite okay if the hard copy arrives the following week, the week of July 4th. Everything that comes electronically should come in MS Excel format, not PDF. We cannot do anything with a spreadsheet that comes in PDF, and we do need them for analyzing the filings. The hard copy comes with a pair of signed and notarized forms, which are in the workbook. Yeah.
So to review the applicable exemptions and variations for this year's filing, we still have the pre-2010 ACP rate exemption for the Solar Carve-Out Program. So this applies to any current contracts that were signed before 2010. So they're not actually exempt, but for these contracts, you can pay ACP at the Class 1 rate as opposed to the Solar Carve-Out rate. This is something that's only for competitive retail suppliers, and something to keep in mind, if you choose to avail yourself of this exemption, you can't bank SRECs for future compliance. You can only make the Class 1 ACP payments. Something new this year is a bifurcated Solar Carve-Out minimum standard. You can find this on Table 2 of the workbook that was sent out. So this is because we lifted the cap of the Solar Carve-Out program in 2013 with the emergency regs that we filed then. So how this works is all load that's under contract prior to June 28th, 2013 has a minimum standard of 1.5359%. All load that is June 28th, 2013 or later has a 2.1442 minimum standard. So this, again, is found in Table 2. It applies to all suppliers, all load serving entities, not just competitive retail suppliers. So again, it's just you have a lower minimum standard for pre-June 28th load and a little bit higher standard for post-June 28th load. And again, there's also a Solar Carve-Out 2 compliance exemption. So this exempts all loads served under retail contracts executed before April 25th, 2014, and this is only for competitive suppliers. So we just wanted to go over some strategies and best practices, specifically as in regards to auction SRECs, which were certificates that were deposited into the solar credit clearinghouse account and reminted. For vintage 2012 auction SRECs, those have to be used for 2015 compliance. They were reminted for 3 years. This is the final year that they can be used for compliance. If you have any vintage 2012 auction certificates, you should definitely be using them for this year's compliance. 2013 vintage auction certificates, they can be used for this year or for next year. And 2014 auction certificates can be used for this year and also for next year. So we do recommend that if you have these auction certificates, you may want to use them for compliance in 2015 rather than in 2016 based on market outlook. They'd have more value if you use them for this year's compliance or for 2015 compliance. And auction SRECs for use in 2016, if you don't want to use them for this year's compliance but for next year's compliance, they should stay in your main GIS account or in your banked account. They should not be settled into a state-specific sub-account.
Banking certificate. Oh, this is yours again. All right.
Again, just to review banking certificates, you can bank, if you buy more certificates for any class that exceeds your obligation, you can bank them forward for compliance. We do recommend that whenever you can, you should avail yourself of this ability. So the banking limits are a percentage of that specific compliance obligation, and they can be used in one of the following 2 compliance years. So if you're banking 2015 certificates, you can use them in 2016 or 2017. So the amount that you can bank varies by class. It's up to 30% of your obligation for Class 1, 10% for SREC 1 and SREC 2, 30% for Class 2 renewable. You can't bank forward waste to energy Class 2 certificates, and for APS it's 30%. And if you choose to bank forward any certificates for compliance, they should be settled into your sub-account before June 15th, which is the end of the trading year. If you have any errant certificates after the 15th, it does create accounting issues. If you find that you do have any, please let us know as soon as possible and let GIS know as soon as possible. If you have any questions, again, please contact myself or Howard so we can try to make sure that everything is settled into the correct account by June 15th.
If for any one of the classes of RPS, slide. Yep, there we go. ACP payments, alternative compliance payments. If you fall short of sufficient certificates for any one of the classes, then you make up the difference with ACPs or ACPs, alternative compliance payments to the Mass CEC by June 24th. The June 24th date is not a hard and fast date, but if you want to be able to get your receipts in with your compliance filings by July 1st, as you're required to do, then that's the date that the CEC wants them, so they can get those receipts out to you. As there are complete instructions for this on the ACP, the instructions for worksheet number 13 in the workbook, which gives you the contact information of the Mass CEC. They send you a form which you'll use to itemize your payments. You'll have one notification sheet for each class or subclass, and then once you send them in, they'll send you electronically a receipt for each type of ACP that you remitted, and then those receipts come in with the filings. If you do not have your receipts back by July 1st, do submit the filing by July 1st because it's due then. And then email the ACP receipts as soon as you do receive them.
Again, a note about the 2015 SREC auctions. We do expect to have an SREC 2 auction this year. We don't expect to have an SREC 1 auction this year, as the SREC 1 market is currently undersupplied, but the SREC 2 market is significantly oversupplied.
There's absolutely no reason you should not be able to sell an SREC 1.
Yes, absolutely.
In the market.
So again, June 15th is the deadline to make deposits into the auction account. If you have participated in previous auctions, it will run in the same way. So you have to submit a qualification form to the auction agent. As we did for last year and previous years, we strongly encourage retail suppliers to participate in this year's auction. It does present an opportunity for you to reduce your future compliance costs. And if you do, when you're participating, to bid in the first round of the auction so as not to increase supply or increase the demand for future years.
Yeah, if it goes to a third auction, then the minimum standard in a future year is going to be higher than if it clears in the first auction. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, and when will information about registering for the auctions go out, roughly?
In the next week or two, you should look for information about the auction.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so that brings us to the end of the slide set. What's available at our website are things if you're a loan serving entity, you've already received the compliance workbook and instructions attached to a cover email, but the guidelines that are referenced in the instructions are also at that site, as well as last year's slide set and last year's webinar. But that will be the place where you'll be going to get this year's slide set and webinar. I think we'll just replace last year. Okay, and that's the contact information. Mike Judge is extremely busy. We have not provided his phone number, although some of you know it. Okay, so let's go to the form. Okay, this is the form you received. The first page is pretty well self-evident. Several of these, I should mention, throughout the workbook, there will be places where what you put in a cell is going to be copied to a cell on one or more other pages further back. So in this case, the legal name is going to wind up on the top of every other page, and the name further down this page of the authorized representative will show up on the forms at the end of the workbook. Next page. Already should have been on the top here. Okay, so that little 0 in the yellow box, that will be the name copy of your name, the name of your entity copied to this page. This is basic information. The things in this first table, Table 1A, are going to be copied to all of the other compliance tables in the workbook. This is the name of your GIS sub-account or sub-accounts if you have more than one, and the total electricity supplied to all your email under all your retail contracts for that sub-account. The total in the light green box should be the same as the grand total of that you were sent in May of your retail load obligation. The other thing on this page, which gets some of which appears later, is how you decide to make use of your SRECs. UER suggests you fill this out tentatively at the beginning and see how that works out later in your solar carve-out, sort of carve-out 2 workbooks, and you can come back here and revise. Next. And that table is the same as last year's. This is the
bifurcated minimum standard for the solar carve-out minimum standard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. It says at the tab say, oh yes, solar carve-out load allocation. That's the short title for this workbook, and this is where you will be filling out for each month of 2015 how much load you supplied under those older contracts, how many of such contracts you had each month, and then, your total load for each month, and then the number of contracts for each month, and then the how much of that load was supplied under those earlier contracts, and then the difference will show up on the last column, and then the totals for those are going to show up below. Here are the yellow cells in columns B and D. Those are going to be copied from the previous table, and here you'll be sorting out those earlier the load served under the earlier contracts. You'll be sorting that out by contract. Most of you will have just one product, so that you'll have just the one number, which is the same as the total from the table above, and then you'll get the difference. Here you're projecting for future years. You will not be held responsible in court for these numbers. This is your best projection. This is to help us with future planning. Someday, once those older contracts have expired, then this whole page will disappear. So, next. This is the load exemption. This is a table which I think has about 2 more years to run. Has to do with contract.
This is the solar carve-out 2 load exemption. So this is the table that you should fill out if you have pre-April 25th, 2014 contracts, if they're still current.
Oh, no, this is not going to expire soon. This is not going to expire anytime soon. It's table 12 that's going to expire within probably 2 more years.
So again, when you're filling out, and the same with the previous tab, as you're filling out the total load, these should be the same across all the tabs and should match the total that you put on that first page, on that first tab. And then you just put the number of contracts and the total electricity supplied under those contracts to figure out the exemption for the solar carve-out 2 minimum standard.
Here where you get the 2 columns copied from the preliminary info table, and then again, as with the previous table, you distribute the number from the total from the column above into this the column of this table, and those will get from that yellow. These yellow ones will be copied forward. These 2 tables, this table and the one before, the filling out part works the same,
right?
And then the same thing projecting forward. This is the kind of table which last year was troublesome for a lot of filers, especially since it was the first time for many of them. Please try to do them carefully and get them right. And if we see what looks like errors, we'll get back to you, and we'll talk about fixing it. Okay.
And again, if you have any questions on filling out any part of the workbook, please we're happy to answer any questions you have and to help you with this, to make sure that there are as few errors as possible and that you understand what information is required for each tab.
Now, there's also a table 3X, which only one of you should have. The rest of you, don't give it a thought. But in the instructions, it tells what 3X is about, and if you think you're supposed to have 3X and you don't have it, you better contact me right away. Okay. Now, this is called errant. We're trying to think of a neutral way to call these certificates. These are certificates that, for any reason, did not end up settled in your state sub-account, but which you are using or proposing to use, you want to use for compliance. Something might have gone wrong and they wound up just not settled, and they'll show up in an unsettled certificates report of the GIS. Or if you're a filer that left the market partway through the year, and in quarter 4 and you need certificates, you needed to acquire certificates, and you found you could not put them in your quarter 4 GIS because you had no load against which to put them there. Then, as has been mentioned to some of you who were in that situation, they would go into the reserved account with the proper description that they were for Massachusetts RPS or APS compliance. But if you're in that situation, please get in touch. Anyway, here you have to specify what those are, and for each class, and the total from each of those columns is going to wind up in the compliance underneath the compliance tables that follow. And the reason we're asking for this much information is because, as you know from the annual report, we do end up showing what kinds of certificates and from where the compliance came from every year. And we normally get that from your GIS Unsettled Certificates reports, but if these aren't going to be in that report, we want to see them here. Okay, so if you think looks like you're going to have to use this report, so please get in touch with me first. Or if you're in the middle of using it, get in touch with me second. All right, first of the compliance workbooks. Everything that's yellow came from other tables. The light blue at the bottom of column E came from another table. Here's the color coding down here. You'll see this color coding on every page. Things that are green were automatically calculated by formulas that are in each of these cells, as you can see going through this. The note, the reminder that the solar carve-outs are actually part of Class 1, so when we get to the total obligation for Class 1 in column J, the 10% obligation is calculated, and then subtracted from that will be the obligation from the solar carve-outs. So it's the net non-solar carve-out obligation that winds up in column J, and then from that we calculated any surplus, the limit on how much surplus can be banked, and then what you finally end up being able to bank. This is the basic table for the basic way that all the tables look, except some of them have several more columns for the peculiar wrinkles of those classes. Now, here's the solar carve-out. Remember table, what was it? The table 2 that had the allocations between, that had the load allocations of the solar carve-out according to contract dates. This is where those numbers will show up, and that's in columns D and E. And then those numbers over here in L and M, those totals get multiplied by the relevant minimum standard for those relative allocations, and then they get added up in column M. So what had been column J in the class 1 becomes column N here because it's got to add up the two obligations according to contract dates. I didn't mention these others. It's hoped that they're self-explanatory. The actual certificates, this is going to be true for all the tables. This first clear column will be the actual certificates you acquired and put into your state-specific sub-account. Ones that did not get into that account and which we called errant from table E. Was that table? No, excuse me, not table E. Sorry, table 4, the exempt certificates. Those would show up in this column here. Sorry, in this column here, and the total from the solar carve-out column of the errant table would show up down in this box here, and those two numbers should be the same. If they're not, you did something wrong. And go back and figure it out. Can't figure it out, call the OER. Then any banking that you have would go into these two tables. Most suppliers have things banked only from the previous year. In the case of the solar carve-outs, there are only 17 certificates that got banked from 2013. From 2014, though, there are over 36,000 bank certificates available to use in 2015. So then, once that's done, those get added up. They get subtracted from the total obligation in column N. The result is how much you're short, and that would show up here as your ACP requirement. And your total ACP requirement will in turn show up in table 13, which will multiply that number, that total, by the ACP rate. Right. Back to where was it? Silvercar. Okay. And then once the ACP is filled in there, then all the previous four white columns and the ACP column get totaled up in column K, and that's how much you ended up. That would be your total certificates, and that should be column K should be either the same as column N, or it may be more if you ended up, if you required extra certificates. If you got anything in column, if you do have extra, that means the ACP is going to be 0, because the extent that you're short in these four columns, it'll show up as a requirement in ACP, and that'll show up as being the same as column N. Now, if you have an excess, then that excess is going to show up in column O, and then that'll be compared with your with the limit on bankable attributes, and any excess that you're allowed to bank forward will show up here. Good spot to mention that if the banking in order to bank any surplus certificates, you actually have to submit them in your filing. You do not do inter-year banking. Certificates. Sometimes we call it Silvercar Carve-Out 1 or SREC 1. To distinguish it from Silvercar Carve-Out 2 that started last year. Since it started last year, you will see there is nothing banked from the year before because there wasn't any. This works the same as the previous one. Here again, you've got the figures in columns D and E. You get the figures that showed up in the table 3. For contract date, and then in this case it's only the figures in column E for which you have a compliance. The ones in column D were exempted, and we didn't really need to put it there, but just to make everything more clear, we show that for your obligation we're only multiplying it by column E. Okay, and then the same thing happens with all these other columns. The other thing I should mention at this point is, although it's been mentioned before, is that for Class 1, Class 2 renewables and ACP, the banking limit is 30%, but for the 2 solar carve-outs, it's only 10%. On to renewable RPS Class 2. There are 2 RPS Class 2s. There's renewable energy and waste energy. In the case of both of them, there's a pair of extra columns that only one filer is going to be using. That's the filer that still has some contracts left over from before 2010. That was in 2009. Anyway, most of you don't have to worry about that, and you'll get an automatic 0 in this. Instead of copying from that table 3x that you won't see, there's just going to be a 0 there. So just don't worry about it. And then everything else works the same, except we're adding up everything before we go multiplying by before we do the automatic calculations of the last few columns. Waste energy has something special that's been happening since 2014. That is, there's no banking forward from 2014 or 2015. So you'll see that there's going to be a 0 see that since there was no banking from 2014, 2014 banked from is blanked out. If you've got anything banked left from 2013, by all means use it. This is your last chance to use it. Okay, and again, there'll be no, this will end up as a 0 in column Q. And they say notes below to explain it. It's in the instructions as well. APS is the same thing. You've got that exempt load 3/2009 contracts that only one of you has. And but the banking proceeds as normal with the 30% limit there. Green certificates, this is one of the more difficult ones. And if you've got green products and you've read everything and you've read this in the instructions and you've got questions, phone, instead of trying to go through this and stumbling over my words. You don't want to hear me stumble over my words. No, I don't want to. Finally, the table 12A is another exemption thing. In this case, it's the original solar carve-out or solar carve-out 1. It's not an outright exemption from compliance, but it's distinguishing load served under older and newer contracts and a different ACP rate used for those. So after you fill things out in the white boxes here, we're going to take, that'll total itself there, and if you're, whether if you haven't used the line losses in column E, then you will, then that's going to show up here, but what we really want is with the line losses, which is how we do all of the obligations. And then that's going to be copied to the table down here. Everything in this, and banking forward, I think there are only maybe 5, at the most 5 suppliers that still have any contracts for 2015. In 2015, still serving load under earlier contracts in 2015. And there might be only 2 companies that are going to fill out anything on this table that last year said they were going to have 26, they're still going to have those load under those contracts in 2016. Most of you aren't going to be showing anything here. And most of you aren't going to be showing anything in here. And the zeros will automatically carry down to here. Everything here in the bright yellow is going to be copied from elsewhere or calculated in this table. So you don't have to worry about filling anything out here. Just give it your rapt attention, because the extent that you've got any SRECs under older contracts, they're going to be the AC, and if you have a shortage in those, the ACP figure is going to show up here. For our newer contracts, the ACP figure is going to show up here, and will be totaled down here. But these figures from lines 68 and 70 are going to show up here under solar carve-out at the solar carve-out rate or solar carve-out at the class 1 rate. This is the table, of course, this is your bottom line table. This is how much you're short in each of these classes with figures from the other tables, and each of these squares tells you exactly where it's copied from. And then these, oh, I don't want to replace that. Wait. And these are the ACP rates for this year. Those will multiply across, and it's these figures that you're going to use when you do the notification forms for the Mass CEC for your ACPs. Finally, you have a couple of unnumbered forms at the end, and those should be self-explanatory. The name of the authorized rep is going to show up from the first table to here, and then that's for you to sign. Where is it? I don't see anything there for notarized. What happened?
They have to mail it in.
See, that one doesn't get made. It's just, I think it's just the authorization one that gets notarized. Otherwise, the other one would have shown it. It's for applications where the authorization gets notarized.
Yeah.
This is the filing. On this table, we are going to replace the workbook for everybody because it turns out that I accidentally copied from the first page the authorized representative's name down here, but it only belongs up here. And somebody caught that. Got some sharp LSEs out there looking over our shoulders, and we hope that I hope that all of you will look through these tables as early as you can and see if you catch any other errors. There's a lot that went into these tables, and in the end, it's you guys that are going to catch the errors. And please be nice to everybody and call in, email if you find any errors so we can get corrected workbooks out to everybody. Last year, I think we went through 2 or 3 corrections. This is the only correction I know we have to make so far. Anyway, everything gets sent in for July 1st, and then you follow up with hard copy, and the hard copy, these last 2 workbooks, if you print them out, get signed. This here, take a look at the instructions to see what you, and just fill that out as best you can. We just want to know how the authorized representative, what's the basis for that person to be authorized to sign the filing. That's all. Okay, where are we now? I think we're to questions. How do I find out questions?
Could you please review page 11?
What?
Green, yeah. So go to the green
Page 11, Alan.
products, tab 11.
Okay. Are you reading the question to me?
That was the question. Could you please review page 11?
Oh. Oh, thanks. That's the one I didn't want to review. All right. First of all, in the instruction manual, we tell you what a green product is. Green product is where you're telling your customers, your retail customers, that you sign up for this product. We're not just gonna send you regular plain old electricity along with green along with renewables and other things represented by by the RECs and such that we're going to buy. We're going to go beyond the 10% Class 1 renewable requirement and buy you a bunch more renewables. And if you've got a product like that, then it's a different product than your regular product. Or maybe that is your regular product. There are some companies that have more than what's required in their standard product. If so, you should be naming the product here and telling us what sub-account it's reflected in at the GIS, giving the total electricity sold in 2015 under that product, and then how many Class 1 renewable attributes are used to fulfill the green marketing claims over and above the RPS obligation. So over and above the RPS Class 1 10%, which you'll recall includes your solar car output. And then finally, how much, what the total RPS Class 1 attributes is that you're using to comply with. Sorry, I got to get up and move closer to the screen to see this. Oh, okay. So it's the total that you're using in the product to meet the marketing claims, and how much of that is being used for just the RPS compliance. And the total of the two isn't necessarily going to meet 50% or 100%, because you could be using, your product might say, yeah, we're going to give you Class 1 and Green E certificates, or we're going to give you some other hydro certificates that aren't RPS qualified in Massachusetts. So we just need to know what you're doing with your Class 1 RECs, and we need to know how much in the end. You'll see in the annual report we say how many Class 1 RECs got used for the green products. We don't give a report specifically on the green products and where everything in those products came from. Here's the next question. That's it?
Is it?
Well, come on. Well, let me give some more advice then, since I used to be a teacher. My first piece of advice, you've heard this from your teachers, read the instructions first. Read through them all. Actually, even before you read the instructions, read the cover email, which is full of sort of overarching or particularly important instructions. And then, but to get it right, you really got to read all the instructions. Of course, if you've been at this for a while, you already know a lot of what you're going to read there. But in the instructions itself, there are places where it says new. And if you see something that says new, you better you better, even if you've been at it, you better pay attention to that. And anything that has a bold note in the instructions, pay attention to that. And then in the cover email, there are things there that, a lot of what's there is to help people get it right in the end and not to make mistakes that have proven to be common in past years. We're all human. We all make mistakes. I already found there's already one mistake in the workbook. It might not be the last. And we don't expect every filing to come in right. So the next suggestion, beyond reading the instructions and reading them sooner rather than later, and maybe even trying out the workbook before June 30th, is if you see anything that's unclear to you, please get on your computer and shoot an email off to me and Caitlin, or pick up the phone. The closer it is to July 1st, maybe the more likely it is you're going to want to pick up the phone. By the way, do not try to phone me the next 2 days. I won't be. But Caitlin will, and I expect to be here, I think, every day next week. I'm not going to telecommute at all next week, but we do have a couple of other things.
Yeah.
I've got at least one conference call, and I think we have do we have a regulatory meeting outside one day next week too?
We are available for any questions. So if you leave a voicemail or an email, Howard and I will get back to you as soon as we can.
That's right. Okay. Don't worry if you're not here or not. We'll get back to you. Any other questions show up? No. Okay. All right. I think if you have follow-up questions after this webinar is over, then by all means, just send them right on in. And if one of your questions is going to be of general interest, we may shoot an email to everybody, providing a bit more guidance.
Yep.
The new workbook with that one correction, I think I'm going to wait till the beginning of next week to do that, just to see if any other errors show up.
Okay.
That's on a page that's going to be the last thing you do anyway. That's the page that gets signed. Okay? So,
I think we're good.
do we pause a bit for more questions, or do we shut it down? It's not a regulatory hearing, so we don't have to sit here. Okay?
Well, thank you, everyone. Again, if you have questions as you're filling out the workbook, please reach out to us. We are available to help you if you have anything that's more specific to your filing. And we are available. Howard and I are very available and are here to help you.
And we really do want to help you get it right the first time. And once they're all in, then we'll help you. If you made a mistake, we'll help you get it right. Okay?
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for participating. Have a good day.